Okay. We are here. Here's Parshas Toldos is what we're supposed to be doing here today. Parshas Toldos has in it the birth of Yaakov and Esav, and the well-known issue that existed with the blessings that Yaakov takes somehow, the creative way. In the middle of the portion, there is an extended description of the patriarch Yitzchak dealing with a fellow, with a kingdom, perhaps a tribe, the Philistines, and Avimelech. Avimelech plays a significant role in Bereshit because he interacts in Parshat Vayera with Avraham. And now again, there's an interaction with Yitzchak. We know, when we study Chumash, we know very well that we approach the patriarchs and the matriarchs as people with personalities, and they have different personalities. When religion turns into one size fits all, you can have some serious problems, because it's impossible to go ahead and provide a system for the diversity that exists among people. So when you read about Avraham and Yitzchak, and they were very, very different, you know very well that they interact with people differently, and they have a little bit of a different agenda of what they are trying to achieve. So what we're going to hopefully do today is, number one, assess Yitzchak. Yitzchak does not get the coverage that the other patriarchs do. He does not have the several parshiot of the first Jew of Abraham. He does not have the coverage that Yaakov gets as the exiled Jew. But nevertheless, this is the portion where he makes his appearance and he interacts. We're going to try to assess. There's seats here if you want. That's not we're going to go ahead and try to the best of our ability to figure out and assess the Yitzchak personality. Now, we always hear the term of Ayin Panim LaTorah, that there are many, many ways of reading one verse, many, many ways of reading a section. And what we're going to try to do today is to bring things together. In other words, some of the readings are not going to perhaps be precisely the readings that Rashi used, but they're going to be readings that other commentators use. And who's here? Welcome. When did you get back?
He's not back yet.
You're not back yet?
24 hours.
Not back yet, okay. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do today. Sounds fair? Now, let's go back to start to appreciate what's happening here. Let's start on page 98. So we're going to go back to page 98. And it's about an interaction that Abraham has with Avimelech. As we're going to as we're going to get back to Parashat Toldot and read about Yitzchak's interactions, we will learn a lot about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. It exists. It has existed for some long time. While historians love trying to figure out an explanation as why they hate us so much, right? Why they hate us. And if you're going to read a work of history from the 17th century and read about the massacres that occurred in the Ukraine in the years 1648 and 1649, so they're going to go ahead and give you a rational explanation that the peasants were being pressured by the magnates, and the magnates did not interact with the peasants directly, but they used the Jews in the middle. So therefore, this tremendous pressure that they were demanding from them, 6 days a week of work and high prices for their alcohol, caused them to get so angry, and therefore they massacred 20,000, 30,000 Jews. They're going to come up with rational explanations. We as Jews know very well that it is something that perhaps you could explain specific periods, but there's a big picture there, that there's something that we perhaps cannot understand, or perhaps it exists in the world and will exist until we reach that era that we talk about, a messianic era when we can actually fulfill our responsibilities. So we're going to visit anti-Semitism as well, but let's turn to page 98, and we're going to focus briefly on a few of the interactions that Avraham has with Avimelech. So, page 98. This is round 2 of the interaction. And if you look at verse 25, we find Avraham rebuking Avimelech regarding the wells of water that were seized by Avimelech. So again, verse 25. V'hochiach Avraham et Avimelech. He gave him hochacha, tochacha. He what? He rebuked him. He approached. He dealt. He interacted with him verbally. And Avimelech obviously says, "Ich weiß gar nicht. I don't know what you're talking about." But then they go ahead, and there's a covenant that's created there. How is the covenant created? So if you look down the page, Avraham in verse 28 takes seven lambs, and he places them, and Avimelech obviously asks him, what are these 7 animals for? And he tells him, listen, I'm going to go ahead and hand them to you because this will serve as a testimony that this well here is mine. Fine. As a result of that, in verse 31, the place was called Be'er Sheva, right? Now, why was it called Be'er Sheva? Don't think that it was because there were 7 animals handed from Avraham to Avimelech. No, that's not the reason. He used 7 animals because 7 animals is Sheva. Sheva is close to Shvu'ah. But the real reason for giving the name Be'er, because it was all about wells. The Middle East is all about water. Right? You need to survive, you need water. And if Avraham has the water, he has a base. And if he has a base, he can fulfill his goal. And his goal is to interact with people in a very decent way and to inspire them and to talk to them about a God and ethics and values. So he wants that Be'er. But you got to deal with the people in the region. The people in the region at the time were dealing with Avimelech. So they need a covenant. They need some kind of pact. So he uses 7, not for the sake of 7. His goal really is to have an oath. So therefore, Kisham, at the end of verse 31, we are told that the name itself, why is it called Be'er Sheva? Kisham nishbe'u shnehem, because the 2 of them took an oath. Now, this was a very serious oath because there was even a covenant in next verse. There's a brit. Now, after that covenant, Avraham gets to work. Now remember, Avraham is very comfortable now. I have a pact with the local, I trust and I have a relationship with this local authority. I can now get down to business. What was Avraham Avinu's business? People, interacting with them. So right after that, in verse 32, 33, what happens is he plants in Eshel. Vayita Eshel. What exactly is this Eshel? Perhaps a tree, perhaps a tent. You're familiar with the rabbinic tradition that it stands for Achila, Shtiyah, and Lina. In other words, it was his opportunity to welcome people. He's interacting with people. And he continues, and with great confidence here, because this is right after the covenant, Vaikrasham b'shem Hashem, and he's calling out in the name of God, which basically means he's sharing with people about God. This is what occurs. Abraham has a very good relationship now. There's a covenant, there's an oath. So if you ask Avraham Avinu, what's Be'er Sheva about? He said, Be'er Sheva is because we took an oath. I committed myself to be, because he knows very well, Avimelech, that I have great potential of growth here in the future. He sees me, Avimelech sees Avraham as someone you have to reckon with, especially in the future. He wants a relationship. I want a relationship with him because right now I have an agenda, I have a goal, I want to reach out to people. I have to have a base. How do I have a base? I achieve a base by having this covenant with Avimelech, we're good. So this is Be'er Sheva. Why? Kisham nishbehu shnehem. Because there was an oath. This is what's occurring with Abraham Avinu, and you would imagine they're going to live happily ever after as a covenant, but now we could go ahead, and now I think we're ready for the interaction that occurs in this week's portion. Page 130. Page 130. Now, there's a famine in Israel, a famine. Yitzchak moves south to a region that is part of Eretz Yisrael, and we know it's part of Eretz Yisrael because God tells him, don't leave Eretz Yisrael. So he's in a region that is technically part of Eretz Yisrael, but at the time it's controlled by the Philistines. So now he settles there. He gets an area. He's given an area, and they assess this area to, let's say, yield 1,000 pounds. And it yields. So here we go in verse 12. We get a little bit of an indication of the success Yitzchak has. Vayizra Yitzchak, page 130, verse 12. Ba'aretz in that line. Vayimtza bashana hahi. In that year, this was not such a good year, by the way. Remember, we're dealing here with the famine. But he plants, and the yield was 100-fold. Me'ah she'arim. 100 times. Nothing to do with Me'ashurim. Right, nothing to do with the neighborhood. It has to do with the fact that they assess the land for a specific amount, and he lands up with 100 times. And as a result, he becomes extremely successful. In the next verse, Mikneh, Son, Bakar, he has everything. So what happens when the Jew is very, very successful, and it's seen, and there's some jealousy, right? Have you ever been at a Jewish wedding? And you look at the non-Jews looking at the Jewish wedding, and have you ever thought a little bit of what they're thinking? Right? Better not, right? In other words, by them, a wedding could be, fly down to Vegas, you drive through, and Shalom Al Yisrael Mazel Tov, however it lasts, but it wasn't expensive. But by us, right? By us, a wedding is a ganze Meiser. Vaikanu also plishtim. At the end of verse 14, there is, what is there? Jealousy. And here we go. What's happening now? This great covenant that his father had, this covenant, this great relationship. What's happening in verse 15? V'chol ha'be'erot. The rabbis tell us that there were actually 3 wells. 3 wells. And these 3 wells that were dug by Avraham were controlled by Yitzchak. So these are areas that he controls, and people come there. And if they come there, he interacts with them. Great potential there. But due to the fact that there's jealousy, the jealousy turns into hatred. So in verse 15, V'chol ha'be'erot asher chafru avdei aviv, all of these wells that were dug by the servants of his father, b'yemei Avraham avim sitmum plishtim. They were filled with earth. Vaymalum afar. And the hatred continues. So now, verse 16, Vayomer Avimelech el Yitzchak. In other words, the hatred, it's trickle up. It starts off with the locals, but then authorities have to take a position that matches the attitude of the masses. So Avimelech says to him, Lech me'imanu. Me'imanu. Look carefully at that word, because it's afterwards we're going to have to compare it to another word. So he says, please, he says to him, make your way out, because you have become mightier than us. Ki atzamta mimenu. But it also means that your mightiness, your financial success is from us. The Jew is controlling the market, he's taking everything from everyone else. Right? There's a conspiracy, they want to take over the world, they control everything, so therefore you have no place, imanu. So where does he settle? Now, he does not have to leave the region completely, but he settles now in the Nachal Gerar. So he moves on, so this is occurring in verse 17, and there's a valley near the city, and he settles there. And now Yitzchak has his own, so first of all, in verse 18, he's going back to clear those wells. And then we are told that there are three new wells. So far, so good. We have 3 wells that his father dug. They were filled by the Philistines. He goes ahead and re-inaugurates them, basically. And then, if you look carefully in verse 20, we are told that there are new wells. But with the coming of these new wells, there are fights. The locals claim that they have ownership because the water in the region is theirs. Yitzchak claims, and his servants claims, no, they actually belong to us. The names of the wells are spelled out in verse 20. Vayarivore Grai Rabbi Yitzchak, and due to the fact that well number 1 had this interaction that was negative, it was called, they named it Esek, because there was a quarrel there. Number 2, well number 2, same idea. It was called Sitna. Okay, there's a fight there. They call it Sitna. Well number 3 is called, well number 3 in verse 22, where actually things are settled and there's no more fighting, is known as the well of Rechovot. It's well known. The Ramban notes that you have to read this text with an understanding that it is establishing a pattern for the future. The 3 wells refer to the 3 temples. While in the first temple, there was a lot of asek, there was a lot of infighting. And the second temple had sitna, he notes. The third temple is the temple of Rechovot. Why Rechovot specifically? You know, when our ancestors were in Egypt, they settled around the Nile. That's how Egypt worked. You need to live next to your source of water, you live by the Nile. It's a very narrow land. It's a narrow. Egypt basically is narrow. You move to the east or to the west of the Nile a few kilometers, there's nothing there. Eretz Yisrael is very, very different. Eretz Yisrael is a land where you could settle on the mountain, you could settle in the valley, you could settle in the north, you could settle in the south. There's Ma'ayanot, Yotzim, Babikau, Bahar. So Eretz Yisrael, compared to Egypt, is Eretz Tova or Rechava. It's broad. Now, the idea that Israel is broad is good geographically, but it also symbolizes the idea that when you are very narrow could mean that you only have one way of surviving, meaning there's no doubt that if everyone lives off the Nile and they all live in an area where the climate is basically the same and their interactions are basically the same, they'll develop the same way. They'll think the same, right? If on the other hand you take a society over a few generations, and a few of them are living up in the mountains, and a few are in the valleys, and a few by the beach, and a few are in the Golan, and a few in Beersheba, personalities develop in a different way, right? Our environment has an impact on the way we think and the way we act. There's diversity, right? We think differently. What inspires you religiously is not what's going to inspire me, right? We're different. Eretz Yisrael is a good land because it is a land that is rechava, it's broad. There's room for different ways of thinking, right? There's different approaches. What the Hasidic Jew is inspired by is not what the Lithuanian Jew is going to be inspired by, or the Sephardi Jew. That's good. Because remember, we are a nation that one day is supposed to interact with the world, a diverse world. We're supposed to be a light upon the nations. We cannot be a one-size-fits-all nation. That is rechava. If indeed what we are being told here is that the first unsuccessful well, where there's fighting, is the first temple, and the second unsuccessful well is the one of sitna, when there is hatred, like a sultan, you've heard that term. The third one, which will be that temple, where actually we will settle and fulfill our mission and get along, that is when we have an understanding that there has to be rechovot for the Jew. There has to be broadness. There has to be openness to different approaches. We have to have a maturity. For a child, it's very, very hard to be sent, for example, to school where everyone eats a specific type of product and you eat another one, right? Send the child to school where everyone is eating on the first night of Pesach round matzahs, and he's the guy that's eating square matzahs, right? Like I can tell you for myself, right? I had to interact with the thing that I was like, you're a little bit embarrassed. You use square matzahs for the Seder? What kind of Jew are you, right? So for a child, it's very hard to understand that there are different approaches, that there is more than one truth. When you mature, and some people do mature, believe it or not. I've met a few mature adults. There's an understanding that, there's more than one approach. It works for you, wonderful, right? You want to be strict in that area, good for you. Don't look down on me, I'm not going to look down at you. We're all good. That is rechava. That's the rechovot that is key to our existence. And that's why the third temple is rechovot. What are you going to do to me now?
No, I just want to know, does that include conservative reform or egalitarian Judaism?
You really are like, we have to have the ability to see a difference between a person and an ideology. In other words, every single Jew has to have a place. We have to have a place for them in our heart. We have to have a place for them in our prayers. We have to be concerned for every single Jew. They're 100% part of our nation, whatever ideology they walk in with. That is a given. That's a must. At the same time, we have the ability, number one, to respect them for what they're doing. In other words, I can tell you, when I was in Memphis, right, there's a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Micah Greenstein. He was the rabbi of the biggest Reform temple there. Now, obviously, my Judaism is a little bit different than Reform Judaism, right? And obviously, I could also give you an historical explanation of why I take a different approach, and I'm very comfortable with it. I was very inspired by the way he interacted with people, because you were in awe when he would meet you. You really felt that nothing else existed. Michael Greenstein is indeed a big name. So I have an obligation to respect him. I have an obligation to learn from him, because there are areas where he is much greater than me. At the same time, I don't have to get up and say that is 100% acceptable. You make your choice. I have the right to say, you know what, traditionally, the Judaism that has survived is an Orthodox Judaism. So I highly recommend that you stay with us here in the Orthodox Shul. So there's a delicate balance that's necessary. The delicate balance is respect the person, love the person, find areas where you can learn from him. No question about that. At the same time, I could go ahead and argue with you that this is something that's going to preserve Judaism, and history has proven it, by the way, that if I want Judaism alive and well in 100 years from now, stick to the wrong teacher. We're good? Okay, now I need some coffee. Okay, so that's the rechovot. That's the rechovot that we're talking about. We're good. Okay, those are the wells. Now, Yitzchak, by the way, in general, is very, very different than his father. His father is calling out in the name of God wherever he can. Yitzchak is avoiding that. And then, if you turn to page 132, God appears to him at night, and he says to him, fear not. You could go ahead and be like your father. Verse 25, we've covered this in detail in the past, but in verse 25, there's a massive shift in what Yitzchak is doing, because he is beginning his emulation of his father. Vayiven sham mizbeach, in verse 25, Vayikra b'shem Hashem, and he starts invoking the name of God. He is calling out. He's getting out of his shell a little bit, which is not natural for him. Fine. Now, Avimelech returns to him. So remember, Avimelech sends him away. There's hatred, there's jealousy. And then he goes ahead and returns to him. How does Yitzchak respond? In verse 27, after Avimelech comes, Vayomer alehem Yitzchak. Yitzchak turns to Avimelech and to General Pico, and he says to him, Madua batem elai? Why did you come here? Va'atem, you snetim oti, you hated me. Va'teshalchuni, and you sent me away me'itchem. Meaning, I believe that if they would have returned to Abraham would have said, oh, welcome back. We're so happy to have you. Let's get back on track. The people person. Yitzchak is very, very honest. Like this, the interaction, he did not have too much trust. He's a person that focuses more on internal development. And he says to him, why have you come? You sent me away, me'itchem. So again, the verse of 27, Vateshalchuni me'itchem. If you look carefully, when Avimelech sent him away, we are told, in the previous page, Vayom Avimelech el Yitzchak, lech, not me'itanu, but me'imanu. Okay, so there's a difference there. When he is sent away, it is lech me'imanu. when he is claiming you sent me away, he said me'itchem. There's a difference, when we're supposed to rebuke people, in Judaism, we're supposed to rebuke people. I don't like getting criticism. I don't know about you. I don't like getting criticized. Now, it's important sometimes because you don't learn. If no one ever tells you you're doing something wrong, right? What was that?
I said you should be used to it. You're a rabbi.
I should be used to it. Thank you. I still don't like it. And the truth is it's necessary. You need it. You need it. In other words, in Mishlei we are told that, when you have, it is better to have a ge'arat chacham mishirei ksil, right? When fools are praising you, oh, you're so amazing, right? That does nothing for you. When a wise person comes and says, you know what, you're doing something wrong, that should be more desirable because our goal in life is to become better. If everyone tells you you're just doing good, you're not going to become better. So it's necessary, but it hurts like going to the doctor, right? He gives you the shots or whatever else you go for a doctor. It's not going to be comfortable. It's necessary. Fine. The worst type of rebuke is when it's someone that really doesn't care about you. Because that's not rebuking. That's basically a person declaring that he is better than you. Right? You walk into a synagogue and no one says hello to you, but the first thing they say to you is like, oh, you sat during Mizmor LeTodah. The minhag is to stand. Right? Meaning, this is not a statement of their deep concern for my Olam Haba, because they know that if I sit during that section of Tefillah, I'm going to lose, I'm going to go straight to Gehenna, and they're deeply concerned, so therefore they tell me to stand. No. It's basically an opportunity for a person to show, you know what, I'm better than you because you are doing something wrong. Those things we really, really, really don't enjoy, and those things are destructive. And they serve absolutely no purpose, and that is not the Torah rebuke. How do you rebuke a person? You rebuke a person when you have a relationship, when you are really concerned. Hocheach tochiach et amitecha. You have to be imo, with an ayin, imo. You have to be with him. In the same verse, by the way, it says, Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Never hate a brother, right? Even if you have no relationship, never hate. There's no room for hate of another Jew. No room for that. Rebuke, on the other hand, that there has to be a greater relationship. Right? You want to rebuke, or there's a need to rebuke someone, you better be sure that this is someone that really, really, really has a relationship, and they know that there's love between you. Right? A brother where there's a good relationship, there could be a rebuke, because he is immecha, with you. Okay, so im is simply with you. Someone on the other hand that is itcha, he's perhaps traveling with you. In other words, you get on a plane, right? There are many people that are itchem on the plane, but imchem is only the person that you got under the same 6-digit code, right, or 6-letter code. When you make a reservation with someone, you made a reservation imam, but when you're sitting on the plane, it's only itchem. You see the difference between that. So now, let's read this carefully. When he is sent away, he is lech. When he is sent away by Avimelech, they're jealous. They're jealous of him. He's becoming wealthy. They see it, and it's something they can't deal with, and they start believing that Yitzchak is taking everything from them. So they say, lech me'imanu. He's not telling him to leave. He's not saying lech me'itanu. Lech me'itanu would be get out, right? Get out of town. We don't want to see you. No. Lech me'imanu. You have to remain here. We want you to be just in the region, but you're no longer with us. It's interesting if you study the theology of the Catholic of Christianity, the Augustine theology, witness doctrine, right? That Jews, how do Christians always struggled with Jews? How do we deal with them, right? These people know the language, right, of the Savior. They know the language, and they rejected him. They're a problem. So how do you deal with them? Do you get rid of them? No. The decision was no. We serve the Jews' suffering is a testimony that could be used to humanity. Look what happens when the Jews. Look what happened to those who rejected JC. You reject JC. Look how they're suffering. Look how they're going through difficulty. So we stand witness, we Jews, because we are necessary. This is something that was so much part of Christianity. Jews have to suffer. It's a must. They have to go through difficulty, but they have to exist at the same time. So we don't want them imanu, but we want you in the neighborhood. We need you there. That's why the state of Israel was a serious challenge to the church, to the Catholic Church, because this doesn't fit well. There's not supposed to be a return of the Jews. Conquering Yerushalayim, right? And this is something that Rav Soloveitch used to point out, but it's even documented, that conquering the 1967 war was a major problem for the Catholic Church. Jews can't have Jerusalem because they're rejected. They're rejected for, this seems to be that they're having a return. There's a major problem there that they have to deal with. A good way to deal with is to claim that it's not theirs, right? But there's a struggle there that's occurring. Lech, not that we want the Jew to disappear. Lech me'imanu. Lech me'imanu. But you know what Yitzchak is telling him? That when you go ahead and you take a group of people and you say, you know what, you're not going to be with us, but you're going to be itanu. Meaning we're going to always keep you around, but we're going to teach our children how bad you are. We're going to teach our children how much you are despised by God, and you are children of the devil, and you are the product of dogs and pigs as taught in Muslim literature, right? What's going to happen eventually? If you start off with the imanu, lech me imanu, it will eventually turn into tashalchuni me itchem. Right? If you have, in other words, the famous, when the Shoah, Cloud Lunsman was his name, that did the famous, in the 1970s, he made the movie Shoah. One of those, I think it's like 9 hours long, right? It's like for a real good Tisha B'Av material. So he interviews in the 1970s some people 2 kilometers down the road from Auschwitz, right? And he starts asking them, so this is a good, maybe 25 years after the Shoah, did you know what was happening down the road? No idea. We had no idea, they say. And at the same time, they went, but the truth is, the Jews do deserve it. The Jews do deserve it. They did kill, JC, they did kill Christ, so, I mean, not that I had anything to do with it, we didn't know about it, but the Jews deserve it, right? Why? If you have a theology, right, for 1,000 years, that these are people that are supposed to be away me'imanu, but be here to be a testimony, right, to be a symbol of evil, eventually they're going to go ahead and put them in gas chambers. That's how history works. And this is perhaps what Yitzchak is telling him. You perhaps only said, lech me'imanu, but the truth is, you know what it's going to turn into. You know what it turned into. Vatishalchuni me'itchem. That's what we're told, and this is a little bit of a lesson in anti-Semitism that we can learn from him. So now, in verse 28, there's a recognition, and he asks for a new covenant. But in the new covenant, in verse 29, there appears to be a rewriting of history. Because when we are told that Yitzchak had to leave, he had a family, right? He had an estate. And he was expelled. You know what it means to be expelled. It's something that we have to read from literature, or perhaps you could see in movies. This is not an easy task to be expelled. It's an image. You have to have an image of 1941 Warsaw, or 1939, where they take a whole community and tell them you move into an area of a few blocks. Right? You think about that image and what Yitzchak and Rivka and the children went through and their difficulty. And this was done by Avimelech. And here in verse 29, he has the chutzpah to say to him, listen, we want a new covenant. We see God with you. Why did he see God with him, by the way? The decline that occurred in the area that the Jews left were drastic, were very, very clear. Right? Spain was once upon a time a superpower. Right? What happens in 1492? Right? They get rid of the Jews. Is Spain still a superpower? Right? Maybe in soccer, but nothing else. Like, in other words, you see what happens. I'm not going to say England, I'll be sensitive. But look what happens to nations when they get rid of the Jews, right? Look what happens to nations. And you could go through history, and if you open your eyes, you realize you get rid of them, you're going to pay a price. So Avimelech realizes that, and he wants to make a covenant not because he's a tzaddik, but he's a practical politician. But then in verse 29, he has a little bit of a chutzpah where he says to him, Im ta'aseh imanu ra'ah. Listen, now that we have a covenant, if you do evil with us, right? Just as, remember, kasher lo nega'anucha, we didn't touch you. V'kasher asinu imecha, what did we do with you? Only rak tov. We only did good with you. V'neshalchacha, and when we sent you away, right, when we expelled you, right, how did we do it? Bishalom, with peace. So now, right now, you are indeed blessed by Hashem. Well, how can he have the chutzpah of saying we sent you away? So what was he saying to him? He said, listen here, in our region, this is Rabbi Milevsky speaking, there were many people that wanted to hurt you. They wanted to hurt you. So it was for your protection. So we uprooted you to save you, right? In other words, you go ahead and as if we're uprooting you, saving Israel from itself. Have you ever heard this term? If you read some literature of countries, of people like John Kerry, and you talk to them about the pressure that they were trying to bring about Israel, to make concessions, right, to go ahead and give over territory. The line they use, and this is one that was used in many, many articles, you have to save Israel from itself. Because Israel cannot make decisions for its welfare. We have to go ahead and pressure them and tell them that you need to uproot communities, because then you'll be safe. All you need to do, by the way, Israel, if you want to settle all issues in the Middle East, just recently, this past few days, a letter from 1986, from Prince Charles, right? Grace Chacham. He fits into the royal family. If you read a little bit of history, he fits in perfectly. And so Prince Charles, about the problem that the Jews came to the Middle East. Everything would have been okay with the Arabs. If just the Jews somehow landed up there for whatever reason, right? We need to save Israel from itself. We need to save the Jews. So when we sent you away, it was for your sake, right? Expulsion is for the sake of the Jew. These are the roots of anti-Semitism, are obviously in this week's portion. So they have a covenant. But let's move on to page 32. Verse 32. They wake up in the morning, and again, there's an oath. How do you think Yitzchak feels when there's that oath that's quote unquote taking place? How confident he is with these oaths. He remembers his dad having an oath, right? And he remembers very well, right, the pain, and it could have been weeks of him traveling and resettling, and he says to himself an oath. Yeah, Grace Ishkayach, thank you so much for your oath. But he has to do what he has to do. Vaishalchem Yitzchak, and Yitzchak sends them away. He sends them away. It's a very interesting word. In the Torah, the word Vaishalchem appears in one other place, and that is that after Avraham Avinu has other children. But he wants to be sure that the one who is going to continue his legacy is not these other children, but rather Yitzchak. You know what he does. So we are told he gave them gifts and Vaishalchem. When you want to be sure you are detached from someone, you do a Vaishalchem. And Yitzchak too, while his father after a covenant, right, after the covenant, and he's living in Beersheba, and the city is called the Well of Oath, which means that these people who live right next to us trust us, we trust them, we're going to be loyal to them, they're going to be loyal to us. So he's very happy to have them in the neighborhood because he believes that there's potential growth here. We can inspire them perhaps. That's what Avraham Avinu is thinking. Yitzchak knows very well who he is dealing with. So right after he has the Kiddush, he says, okay, it's so nice to have you. Please let me show you how you get out of the neighborhood. And the exact same word is presented here. That Vayishalchem Yitzchak, he sends them away, and Vayilchu mito v'shalom. Fine. Now, up until that point, if you are keeping count, how many wells do we have so far? 6 wells. 6 wells we have. 3 of Avraham that had to be redug, right, because of what they did. And then the 3 extra ones, the Essex, Sitna, and Rechovot. So we have 6 wells. After he sends them away, Yitzchak turns around, and he sees a big sign that says Beersheba, right? Highway 6, I think, goes all the way down to Beersheba. So he's standing there, he stops, and he looks at the sign, and it says Beersheba. And he says to himself, yeah, Be'er, right, the well, good thing. of the shvuah, of the oath. And he's thinking to himself, yeah, great oath. In other words, imagine you visited Philadelphia, right? And God forbid a person is mugged in Philadelphia. And then he sees the sign, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And you think, yeah, Grace Ishka, brotherly love. The name could be very agitating when you experience something that is very, very different than what it symbolizes. Yitzchak simply does not like the name Beersheva. Oath? Does the oath serve any purpose? It's interesting that we've talked in the past about a little bit about a Satmar theology, if you remember that. That they talk about, there's a statement in the Talmud that we took an oath to the nations that we're not going to make our way into Israel by climbing walls, meaning we're only going to make our way back to the land of Israel with permission from the nation. So for Satmar, this is what's taught. In other words, in other circles, the first thing taught to a child is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. In Satmar, the first thing that's taught is the three oaths, meaning because that is the root for their anti-Zionism. Now, many other point out that even if it's true that there's such a concept of an oath, if the oath is broken by the nations, right, and they mistreat us, we cannot be expected to stick to an oath when others ignore it. An oath is worthless. I guarantee to you to treat you in a specific way, and you ignore it, I have every right to ignore it as well. Yitzchak is not comfortable with the term Beersheba, but something good happens. Something good happens in the next verse. Vayi bayomahu, that day, verse 32. Vayavo avdei Yitzchak. So the servants of Yitzchak come. Vayagidu lo, and they inform him al odot habe'er asher chafaru. They inform him that there is another well. And they say to him, Vayom lo matzanu mayim. We found water. There is well number 7. Well number 7. Yitzchak has a big smile now. Yitzchak is a very happy man. So now, when there's a 7th well, so suddenly this city, that means the city of an oath is worthless, he has a new name for it. Verse 33. Vaikra ota, and how does he call the well? Shiva. It's well number Shiva. Al ken shema'ir. So therefore for Yitzchak, the name of the city is not the oath, but rather it is Be'er Sheva, well number 7, Ad Hayom Hazeh. For him, forget about the oath. I could still stick to the name that was given by my father, but at the same time, I could give it a name that deals with wells. Wells is something, he's a big fan of wells. He's a big fan of the concept of inspiring, of reaching out to others. No question about that. But forget about the oath. It is Be'er Sheva, not Be'er Shvuah. This is what's changing here. It's the personality of Yitzchak is one that you find often over the past 40 years, we've seen a lot of the Kiruv movement, they talk about it. The Kiruv movement. So you had Kiruv professionals, people that had a great insight in Jewish thoughts, in Jewish philosophy, answering complex questions. And they were doing some incredible things. Over the past 4 decades, you find organizations from NCSY, or Eshat Torah, or Sameach, throughout the world, that there's been a turnaround. What many yeshivot and many schools have noticed is that we need the same type of educators to have inreach. Meaning sometimes we focus so much on having this positive impact on the world, right, and trying to reach out to those who do not have the background, we forget about our own. And many of those things, in other words, I hear from my kids that they have in the yeshiva, there's a kumzitz, right? And they brought in a speaker to talk about hashkafa, right, about Jewish thought and answering the difficult questions. It wasn't like that 30 years ago when I was in yeshiva, because then it was basically ignored. There was an expectation. You'll just be doing as it was done in the olden days. Kiruv, right, or addressing these issues, that is more for the world out there. Sometimes you realize that you cannot just work with an Avraham system of reaching out to the world. You have to go ahead and focus on internal growth, right? You have to realize that The difficult questions are going to come from within. That is the Yitzchak personality. He was deeply disappointed from Be'er of Shvuah, of the oath. But he was a deep believer in wells of Sheva, of the number 7, because for him that symbolizes the idea, let me work on issues from within. Very, very different personality. Hopefully we got a little bit of insight into the anti-Semitism that existed then and exists now, but also we have a little bit of a way of dealing with the different way of interacting with the world around. Yes?
Have you thought about the fact that in our tradition, I believe, Sheva is Teva, and it is Me'ela Teva. So why is he satisfied with Sheva?
We are very, very satisfied with using Sheva correctly. In other words, what you're pointing out is, listen, 8 symbolizes the supernatural. Why not work with the number 8? A successful Jewish person is when you have 7 complete. Shabbos is number 7. What's the idea of Shabbos? Shabbos gives you a way of bringing the week together. Imagine you want to make a box, right? And you have 6 panels. You need something to bring them together. The 7 brings them together. That's how we view number 7. So it is utilizing the 7. So true, there's a concept of the supernatural, and you could give a Parshas Shmini, we could obviously give a whole drasha on the number 8, but this is a week for the 7. When we have our 7 intact, we are in good shape. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good day.